Today I want to talk to you guys about a new so-called free trade agreement between the United States and Europe. It's called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP for short. It's very much like the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, except rather than ensnaring the United States in transnational institutions focused around the Pacific, it'll ensnare the United States in transnational institutions with the European Union, which itself was built by a process that was remarkably similar to what is being pursued here with the TTIP. So the TTIP is really, really bad news, and there's a number of reasons why. Due to time constraints, we're not going to have time to go over everything, but I do want to hit some of the key points. Now, the critics on various different factions, you have Greenpeace that just very recently leaked a whole bunch of documents related to this, and a whole bunch of big labor unions and environmental groups and climate change activists are complaining about this treaty because they say it is going to further empower big business. It's going to create almost a fascist transnational regime where big business and big government will be working together. And that's certainly a valid concern. It's evident throughout the documents that this so-called free trade agreement is going to put big business and really the crony capitalists of the world in the driver's seat along with their bureaucratic allies. And that's what the Greenpeace types of the world continue to miss. This is not just big business driving this. There's also the other side of the coin, which is the big government agenda. And so certainly these are all valid criticisms of this monstrous treaty, which, despite purporting to be about free trade, is really massive amounts of regulations. Regulations, of course, are the opposite of free, and so if this were a real free trade deal, you would not need hundreds or even thousands of pages of regulations to regulate this allegedly free trade. But I want to talk about an even bigger problem than this putting big business, the cronies, in the driver's seat. And that's the fact that the people of the United States and the people of Europe are going to be ensnared in a transnational governing entity over which they'll exercise practically no control. Now, this is the same thing that's going on with the TPP. It's the same thing that happened with NAFTA. It's a hallmark of these pseudo-free trade agreements. So what they do is they create governance institutions, bureaucracies, transnational courts, things of that sort, above and beyond the control of nation states and national voters. So I think a good analogy to use would be what's already happened to the Europeans. Now, it's actually, again, as I mentioned, the same process that was used here. They told the Europeans that they needed to join forces in a common market and have a free trade amongst each other. And free trade is quite popular, and people liked the idea of free trade. What they didn't tell the Europeans over a period of decades, over generations, was that eventually the plan was to merge their monetary systems, their political systems, to the point where now Brussels dictates more than 75% of the laws across Europe now come from Brussels. And they don't come from an elected legislature like you might think. They do have this pseudo-parliament called the European Parliament, but that's more of a rubber stamp type deal. It's kind of like the Soviet Parliament or the Communist Chinese National Assembly. It's not a parliament in the sense that we think of it. Rather, with the European Union, you have the laws coming out of the executive arm of this bureaucracy, which is the European Commission. The TTIP will set up similar institutions that are going to serve as the nucleus to build this transnational government. And the same thing is happening with the TPP. Senator Sessions of Alabama compared it to a Pacific Union, which is going to be quite similar to the European Union. And the TTIP will do much the same thing. Again, it's going to set up these transnational courts, transnational bureaucracies. It will allow the Eurocrats, the European bureaucrats, and big business in Europe to meddle in the affairs of the United States, and vice versa. The United States will be allowed to meddle in the affairs of the European Union, and they're going to be promoting this regulatory harmonization and cooperation where they want to harmonize and basically put all the American people and all the European people under the same set of regulations and under the same unaccountable bureaucracies. And so what do we do if we don't like these regulations? What do we do if we don't like these bureaucracies? Well, there's not much you can do, right? You can't unelect these bureaucrats. They'll be beyond the reach of voters. They'll be unaccountable. And so this, I think, is the real danger that people need to be concerned about. Once we give up our national sovereignty, as the Europeans discovered, you see the British right now are trying to secede from the European Union, it's very difficult to get it back. So we need to be on guard, we need to be aware of what's happening here, and we need to resist. The people of Europe have already experienced this, and ironically, much of what happened to Europe was driven from Washington, D.C., because the globalists, and this was an open open process some decades ago in Congress. There's lots of resolutions to this effect. There's lots of evidence in the congressional record that they wanted to build an Atlantic Union. And to build an Atlantic Union, they realized they would first have to create a European Union, because the small nation states, the middle-sized nation states, were worried about being swallowed up by a more powerful United States. So now they have the European Union. Now they're working on this Atlantic Union. They call it the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, but really it's the same thing. It's going to create the nucleus of this transnational governing apparatus that will rule over 50% of the world economy and almost 1 billion people. So we really need to resist this. We need to say no. We need to defend our national sovereignty, and the best way to do that is to kill the TTIP, to make sure Congress refuses to accept it.